I've never been one for old sayings or pithy quotes or common cliches. You know the things that I'm talking about. The early bird gets the worm. Stuck between a rock and a hard place. A horse of a different color. Now, for one thing, when I was young, I really didn't understand most of those old sayings, and to be honest, I'm not sure that I understand them to this day. And so I'm afraid if I don't understand them, I'm probably better off not really using them, because sometimes I really don't hear them correctly. Now, kids are notorious for hearing things incorrectly, aren't they? There's a true story about a mother with two young daughters. And one day, this mother noticed something rather strange. The house was unusually quiet. And as every parent knows, a quiet house with young children in it is not a good sign, unless those young children are taking a nap. And this mother knew that her daughters were not napping. And so she quietly walked around the house, went from one room to another, and she wasn't able to find them. And she finally heard the sound of whispering, followed by the flush of a toilet. And she heard it again. Whisper, flush. A few minutes later, whisper, flush. And she stood outside the bathroom and she poked her head inside without her daughters knowing that she was there. And they were standing over the toilet, and there it was again. Whisper, flush. Now, one of them was holding a dripping Barbie doll by the ankles, and the other had her finger on the handle. And this is what the mother heard. I baptize you in the name of the Father and the Son, and in the hole you go. True story. Yeah, sometimes kids don't hear things exactly right. Sometimes, though, they do. Sometimes they hear things exactly as they are said, and I don't have to explain to you that that can be every bit as frightening to parents as when they don't hear correctly. Really, last week, Emma Sue went to Pittsburgh. One of our sons who lives there with David. She spent a couple days there before my father-in-law and I drove to Pittsburgh, where she was staying at one of our other sons who lives there, Derek, with his wife, Erin. And the first day that I arrived, I was playing with our 2-year-old grandson, Dylan, and he became exasperated over something, and he blurted out, "Mercy sakes alive," which told me that he had spent a lot of time the previous 2 days with Grandma Dee. And then a while later, he pulled a fast one on me. He looked at me and he said, "Bazinga." And that told me that either Uncle David was around a lot or he'd been watching far too many episodes of The Big Bang Theory. Yes, sometimes children get things exactly as they are said. I think my aversion to little sayings that can probably be traced to something that my maternal grandfather used to say that to this day I really don't understand. Glenn, that's what we call him because he really wasn't my grandfather, he had a habit of saying every 5 or 10 minutes for apparently no reason at all, "G for socks." That's right, G for socks. Now you want to tell me if you have a clue as to what that means? I still don't understand it. But just because I am not really very comfortable using common cliches, it doesn't mean that I'm not fond of and appreciative of the manner in which words can be used movingly and very, very eloquently. And this entire section of the 139th Psalm is a wonderful example of the power of words when they are used in a masterful fashion. There was a Scottish theologian who is reported to have said that the one bit of writing that he would wish to have with him on his deathbed was this, the 139th Psalm. And this is really a creation psalm. But it's not about the creation of the vast mysteries of the universe or the wondrous workings of nature that are all about us in the world. No, the creation of which the psalmist speaks here is, get ready for it, you. You are the object of this writer's very lofty thoughts and eloquent words. And there is one very specific phrase here that I think is crucial. It's crucial to what the psalmist is really, bottom line, trying to convey. In verse 14, he says, I praise you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Now I want to stay here for the remainder of the sermon because there is something absolutely extraordinary in that phrase with a whole possible host of meanings. And the first thing that we might notice about that is if you were following along in your Pew Bible, that's the Revised Standard Version. And what you read was considerably different from what I read in the New Revised Standard Version. For the Revised Standard Version, the Pew Bible says, I praise thee, for thou art fearful and wonderful. That's quite a bit different, isn't it? Now, the amazing thing about that is, though, that the New Revised Standard Version has gone back to exactly what the King James Version translated the verse as. And I don't recall a single other time when that's the case. When the New Revised Standard Version took something and changed it and they went back to the King James Version. And what it points out is the difficulty in trying to understand the meaning of the original Hebrew. So listen to the way this phrase, I am fearfully and wonderfully made, is rendered in 5 other translations. I was marvelously set apart. The wonderful way you created me. Body and soul, I am marvelously made. Thank you for making me so tremendously complex. You made me in an amazing and wonderful way. So I think you get the point. And the point is, you are pretty special. Now, I know that sounds terribly trite, but it's not. In fact, it is one of the most profound and astounding truths that you could ever comprehend. And if you believe it, as well you should, it can transform your life as few other things can. You are fearfully and wonderfully made. But isn't that a rather strange pair of words, though? Fearfully and wonderfully. Now, there are different possibilities as to its meaning, but I really think any parent can understand those two being joined together. For a father and mother, when a child is born, all of the fearful and wonderful possibilities stand before you as you look upon that child. And is not the very same thing true for God as He looks upon each and every one of us as His children? For God, as your heavenly parent, looks at you as a fearful and as a wonderful divine creation. The possibilities are endless. But whether they end up being fearful or end up being wonderful is really up to you. You remember hearing the story of the legend wise man who lived in a cave, outskirts of town, who said that this man knew the answer to any question anyone could ever ask him. A few boys decided that they would challenge him and his ability to know everything there was to know. They caught a bird And one of the boys had the bright idea to go to the wise man in the cave and trick him. He held the bird in his hands and he said, I'll hold this bird inside my hands and we'll go to the wise man and we'll ask him what I'm holding. And he will, of course, know the answer to the question. He'll know I'm holding a bird. But then we'll ask him if the bird is dead or alive. And if he says the bird is dead, I'll open my hands, the bird will fly away. But if he says it's alive, I'll clasp my hands together and kill the bird. He'll be wrong. So they made their way to the cave, and sure enough, they asked the man the question, what he was holding, and he knew that it was a bird. But then they asked if the bird was dead or alive, and as they asked, they looked at one another very smugly, waiting for the answer and waiting to trick him. That wise old man just smiled, looked at the boys, and he said, it's in your hands, my son. It's in your hands. And isn't that a wonderful parable for life? You are the crowning achievement of the wondrous God of all creation. You have been made fearfully and wonderfully with all the possibilities before you. It's really up to you as to which it will be. More than 1,600 years ago, Augustine spoke about the magnificence of human life. When he said, people travel to wonder at the height of mountains, at the huge waves of the sea, at the long courses of rivers, at the vast compass of the ocean, at the circular motion of the stars. And they pass by themselves without wondering. Now, let's face it, there aren't many of us who are enthralled by ourselves, are we? And we tend to think less of ourselves than we really should. Now that may surprise you, but I believe it is true. C.S. Lewis would suggest that we see ourselves as more than just ordinary people. In fact, in writing what he called The Weight of Glory, C.S. Lewis emphatically states that there are no ordinary people. And he goes on to say that you and I have never talked to a mere mortal. He says nations, cultures, arts, civilizations, these are mortal, and their life is to ours as the life of a gnat. But it is mortals whom we joke with, work with, marry, snub, and exploit. Immortal horrors or everlasting splendors. Next to the blessed sacrament itself, your neighbor is the holiest object presented to your senses. I see, I believe this is exactly what the psalmist is trying to tell us. He is telling us that God is within us, at the very core of our being. Deeper and more profound and more fantastic than anything science could ever imagine or understand or measure. The psalmist assures us that God knows us, each and every one of us, and that we are precious and we are priceless in God's sight. And that wondrous phrase, fearfully and wonderfully made, describes you. And actually, the fearfully could just as accurately and easily be translated as awesomely. And so we can perhaps take out the contrast and look at it in just a slightly different way. We can say that the psalmist is simply emphasizing the fact that you are very special. You are both awesome and wonderful. And that's really who you are. You are an awesome and wonderful and unique creation of God. No one else in all the universe, no one else in all of history was exactly like you. Now again, that may seem trite, but perhaps it seems so trite that we don't really think about it often enough, and not thinking about it often enough, we don't recognize how very, very true it is. This is Martin Luther King Jr. Day. In fact, this is the very day that is the anniversary of his birth. And this outstanding preacher and prophet and man of God had something, I think, profound to say about this very topic. He said, so many people are busy trying to be somebody else. God gave all of us something significant, and we must pray every day, asking God to help us accept ourselves. We must discover what it is we are called to do, and once we discover it, we should set out to do it with all the strength and all the power that we have in our systems. We should set out to do that work so well that the living, the dead, or the unborn couldn't do it any better. You know, it doesn't matter how old you are. It doesn't matter how young you are. It doesn't matter what your past has been. It doesn't matter what others think of you or what you have thought of yourself before now. You are an awesome, fearfully, wonderfully, uniquely made creation of God. And to that I can only say, gee for socks. Amen.